session we are going to have a panel discussing about the current evolution of the cloud technology toward the embracing of Edge and IoT to create the convergence between these technologies. As you might have heard in the previous sessions, it's not the first time that processing happens at the edge, because before we were doing it locally because internet was not there. And there was now also a long time period where we moved everything to the cloud, and now it's no more like that due to different constraints, privacy, latency, and so on. And this poses, of course, new challenges. And this is not just about edge, IoT, cloud, but many other sectors. Of course, the networks, high-performance computing, hardware manufacturing, they are all trying to help to make this convergence possible. And today, we have different actors from the industry joining us to tell us their point of view on what is the road ahead to make this happen. And the first one I'm inviting on stage is Klaus Otradovec, Vice President Global Service Delivery from Atos. Thank you, Klaus, for joining us today. We have also Simon Wright, Chief Operational Officer of D-Orbit. And this might look strange because it's a satellite company, but satellite is coming to cloud and to edge as well. Then we have Gael Blondel, which is the Vice President for Ecosystem Development at the Eclipse Foundation, so representing open source, and by the way, open source in Europe, because Eclipse Foundation is incorporated in Europe. And we have then Andreas Weiss joining us today also. He has many hats, spacing from the ECO Association of Internet Industry and Eurocloud Germany, but also Gaia-X. And finally, Antonis Kassano, which is the Director of Business Development, Unisystem, large Greek system operator. So thank you again for joining us. I'm very happy to have you on stage, and the fact that you represent so diverse elements of the ecosystem. And really, I'm looking forward for a nice discussion today. Now I give you 3 minutes, each one of you, to introduce a bit what you do in relation to cloud to edge. And let's start with Klaus.
It's working, I think. Now it works. Now for what I wanted to say. So, Klaus Otradovec, actually, from a history perspective, I have to contradict Federico a little bit. Cloud edge integration is something that exists for quite a long time. I've been working on issues with building IoT platforms, connecting it to clouds, building all this other stuff. But where I completely agree with you, we are absolutely not there, because what we know is stitching very individual connections, which takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and that's why I'm now working with a number of initiatives. Gaia-X, you mentioned that already, is finding a trust framework to always negotiate individual kind of agreements. We're working on the European Alliance of Cloud and Edge to make sure we also build the technology foundation, a lot of that with open source. And when you say this is a group of diverse people, Cloud Edge Continuum also means that we as organizations find ways in alliances, in organizations to come together to ultimately build the technology and the processes to make it happen. And in FNOS, I'm working with our different organizations to do so.
Thanks a lot, Klaus. Simon, take.
Hello. Morning, everyone. My name's Simon Reed from D-Orbit. Like we said, we're a satellite company. The company's based near Lake Como in Italy. And we build our own satellites. in space logistics, and part of what we're doing is working on delivering IoT, edge and cloud capabilities into space. I'll come back to that later. So my background is in this cloud data domain, working in the space industry. Obviously, the archetype is a rocket scientist, and I spend a lot of my time in space forums saying that we are really a data industry. All of the satellites that are in orbit are really there to collect data and information, or pass information and data around. Rocket scientists are very good at inventing and building their own things, their own standards and their own ways of doing it. And there are reasons, historical reasons for doing that. Just 20 kilometres from here, in the European Space Agency site, is where they control all of the European public satellites. And there's a revolution in the space industry happening now about commercialization and use of space due to the lower cost of launch and new technologies and the adaptation and use of new technologies coming from other sectors like cloud and IoT and edge and so on. So that's a really exciting sort of context in which I'm here. Really happy to be speaking in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Your turn, Gael. Let us.
Do I use that one? Okay, thanks. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to this panel. As you said, I'm the open source guy on stage here, and I think that in the cloud to edge continuum, the three important aspects that make open source so important to cloud to edge continuum are that's scalability, because of course with a number of devices we will use, of course we need something that is at least partly open source. Interoperability, because I like this idea that open source, that's like standards that run, and so that you can really directly use. So it will be also very important for the adoption of cloud to edge technologies. And the last one is collaboration, because I think that with open source we have the framework for this European collaboration that has been described in the two previous talks, and that can really help us push for new techno leadership of Europe in this domain.
Thank you, Gael. As you know, I totally agree. Please. Andreas.
Yeah, I take this term of collaboration, which is in the center of our activity to manage collaboration. And after a decade of centralizing workloads and IT sourcing into more data-centric and cloud-centric environments, we are now getting back in a paradigm shift to decentralize everything and getting into the edge. Unfortunately, we are facing 50 shades of edges, so it is not a common term. We need to understand, when I'm talking about edge, I'm more looking at this shared edge approach, where we need to incubate concepts like smart cities, smart mobility. I'm not talking about on-premise edges. And this is also part of the scoping of Gaia X, to orchestrate workloads, cross over various entities, cross over provider. And we started now to discuss this cloud edge continuum. Klaus extended it with multi-provider cloud edge continuum. And we will find some more attributes for this. But in the center, what we need to take care about this orchestration between cloud, between edges, interconnection, and distributed workloads, and to include of building up a pipeline from IoT to AI and vice versa, for example. And this breaks down into how to describe data services, how to manage data services in a collaborative way, to apply usage policies, how to identify the parties which are part of this ecosystem, not just the entities, also machines and processes, and how to serve for this high-level objective of sovereignty, which is also, I think, part of your outline here.
Yes, it's totally part of the event outline, because...
these are the things we are trying to address with Gaia X. Echo is familiar. as we are shaping the internet for more than 25 years. And you might imagine dealing with the internet is a complexity by itself. And we try to bring our expertise also in the evolution of such cloud edge scenarios and bring the stakeholders together from the infrastructure side and from the data ecosystem side.
Thanks a lot, Andreas. Last but not least, Anthony, who's representing a system integrator, so is probably the guy among you more close to the final user of the delivery of the Cloud Edge.
Thanks a lot. First of all the previous conversation positions was exactly the challenges, describe our challenges. We can see that the last 2 years and the digital transformation transform and a lot of customers is coming with with a lot of demanding for new solutions. Solutions that come in covering shipping industry or covering the smart city industry or it's covering the UAV industry. Everything is under constraint. And the biggest problem is that when we're trying, because we like the open source part, we like the open ecosystem part, but when we try to integrate it, everybody taking a position and having an erratic approach that we must have it on the cloud. Somebody wants on the edge. At the end, the biggest problem, the biggest challenges is that to operate this new era of solutions and the combination of the both worlds, the standardization part is missing. It's very important. It's a very big challenge for us. And the second most important thing is to understand that the edge is something that must be very seriously approached, because more and more we can see in very able markets and very distinct markets that this becoming the new norm. So I believe that yes, both cloud and edge is crucial and they have their own path of development, but when you go to the customer and solve problems, there is no space to go in speaking for frameworks idea. You must give solutions. And I believe there the market is not very mature yet.
Thanks a lot, Antonis. And moving back to Klaus, I think one perspective, Atos, is very interesting because you don't work only on the software part of the delivery. I mean, you have also hardware with the Boolean Corporation, and so you really have a clue also what are the challenges in the integration of the hardware and software at the edge, and what is the next step ahead in this integration and in the requirements over the hardware side.
Well, first of all, the challenge comes from the use cases that we want to implement with a cloud edge continuum, if I call it this way. So on the one hand side, you have the IT that's on the shop floor, very, very isolated. You have the OT networks. You have networks that are connected through mobile systems, yet another technology, yet another set of providers. And you have all the way, if you look at latency, sensitive information, so you want to look at regional edge data centers, you want to look at central data centers, you want to look at the hyperscalers, because the use case, you want to trigger an action on a device, which may be in an isolated network, based on analytics of hundreds of thousands of devices that are operated by different providers, based on analytics that you want to run on the cloud. And if you want to do that, you have to make sure you address latency, security, and resilience of the connection to begin with. But you also need to ensure that you have end-to-end trust models and trust systems, so different providers can talk to each other. So it's a multi-layered problem that you actually cannot do by hardware on its own. From a hardware perspective, what we're looking at is one keyword that we're investing in, also in this one, is really to make sure that we have an end-to-end hardware-supported cyber security stack, so hardware security windows, key management servers that work in different type of devices. Really think about the satellite as an edge. Huh? Edge needs to have hardware security that can speak to the end system, confidential computing, that can speak to the end system in the cloud. If you have an autonomous car, it needs to have hardware security that will link all the way to the devices, the mobile edges, the leisure data centers to the clouds, to ensure we have that integrity and encryption. Of course, we will need to look at the cyber security stack. The cyber security. That's true, but also the total software stack. Because on the one hand side, we need to have, of course, the necessary authentication mechanisms. We need to have the capability to distribute data. But we also need to make sure that we can address hardware all as software units. We need to have bare metal as a service, so we can flexibly reconfigure the devices based on the requirements of resilience network. We need software-defined connectivity which goes across IT, OT, and mobile networks. And then on top of that, and that's what we're also working on, we need to mesh the different operator software stacks and application software stacks. Because as we believe mentioned before, as Andreas pointed also out, my point is, in the very rarest of use cases, we will have such a processing chain with only a single provider. If you run IT on the network, you may control it yourself. You may need to talk to a mobile operator. You may need to talk to the hyperscaler, the other stuff. So we need to mesh these software across multiple providers, and that's what we're working on.
Thanks a lot. You can pass over to Simon. Simon, I mean, the satellite is something new in this convergence, and probably even the 5G discussion was not very much explored. But I'm also very curious. I mean, now in the let's say terrestrial domain, we have a lot of these software-defined things, and to me, the satellite was always something more static. What's going on there?
Okay, so thank you. I'll start by talking about the use cases and then the sort of the solutions to those. So, I mean, data from space is very much connected to our daily lives on Earth and everything we do, right? So, we've got here today looking at the weather forecast that was generated from data from space. We'd have used GPS on our phone to find our way to this place, and many other aspects of our daily lives. Increasingly, space is a critical infrastructure providing data that's part of loads of other systems. Okay. Now, in terms of development, I'll go from IoT. I love sort of 50 shades of edge. I'll talk about IoT, edge, and cloud. Okay, in my world, and I talk about cloud in space, which you may disagree, but so. The IoT revolution is very much part of the explosion in the new space industry. There's quite a large number of startups building constellations whose purpose is to collect IoT data from small battery-powered devices in remote locations or in mobile locations, really small things. So these pass over and collect small bytes of data, maybe 10, 20 times a day. And part of my job is to actually help those companies build their constellations in space. Edge computing, traditionally satellites are built for the harsh space environment with almost no processing capacity in space. So they're collecting data, so we're looking at things like agriculture, looking at the fields. They can measure the moisture content and the type and the health of the crops. And that information is really valuable, right? So at the moment, we downlink all that data, even though most of it is just we're looking at clouds. Okay, so we're not even able to process the data to remove the stuff we don't want in orbit at the moment. Connecting that with IoT is really valuable. So if we measure soil moisture from space and have a measurement from a few places on the Earth, that enables us to calibrate the data and make sure we're really confident about the whole data set. Okay, so there's a convergence story there as well. But then there's still limitations in terms of electrical power. I mean, we've got free solar, we've got free power in space, and we can actually scale up that compute capacity in orbit to make use of this. And also on individual satellites, there's limitations because of the way they're packaged and so on. So we're trying to work to build actually data center capability in orbit as well, to take really some heavy lifting data processing, which kind of cuts down the challenge of getting this data from the satellite sensor to a user, which is often several hours actually due to the way it happens. So this is kind of what we're working towards. Now we've actually put the first cloud, what we call a cloud system, into space last year, and we have something ready to be exploited and played with, looking for partners who are interested in actually putting their software in space and sort of testing this out and seeing what we can do with it.
Thanks a lot, Simon. And moving to Gael, we already say that open source has a great role in the ecosystem, even as an approach, as a floor ground to discuss the challenges, as to discuss the standard, the interfaces among the different layers. And we know that there are a number of solutions that we are already using, like maybe Kubernetes and these other components. And I'm curious to know, in your view, what are actually, in fact, these open source software that today are key elements to help creating this convergence, but also to understand if you, in your experience, you see that there are already some sweet spots where more needs to be done and where the community can really make the difference.
Okay, so you talk about Kubernetes, and I think that to come back to Kubernetes, it's interesting to look a bit at the history of the project. So because that's very interesting to understand what we can also achieve in what's coming next. So Kubernetes was created in 2015. That was initially a project by Google, and they released the version 1.0 in mid-2015, and at the same time they created the CNCF. And so they created a foundation to manage the future of the project and to basically, I think that's really the interesting qualities of the technology, plus the capability to have this vendor-neutral open source ecosystem around the technologies that makes the success we know today. And today everybody think, okay, we are working on Cloud-to-Edge, so of course we have Kubernetes, and there are maybe other projects that can also be used, including some projects that are maybe more developed inside in Europe. But really my point is this one, that to be successful with open source, you need to start with a good initial contribution, and you need to set up a vendor-neutral ecosystem. And maybe before going further, I would like to ask a question here. How many of you are working in a team that is contributing to open source, to an open source project? Contributing, not only using, but contributing. Okay, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. But I think that that's really for me, that's the key part of it. Is that if we want to, open source is an opportunity for Europe because that sets a level playing field. But in a level playing field, okay, you are not fighting uphill, but you have to play. So it's really when we will contribute to open source projects, create our own open source project, and also use open source to promote and to push our leadership in some of those new technologies worldwide, that we will succeed. That's one very important point. So Kubernetes is an example which should contribute to the Kubernetes ecosystem, of course. We will not reinvent everything. There's no point in trying to define something that would be a European open source, or that doesn't make sense. Open source is global by construction and by definition. But in Edge, we should leverage our well-known strengths in embedded software and really push to create our own open source standards, our own open source platforms that hopefully everybody will use. And then we have the skills, and because we have this platform is used, of course, we will be in a better position to provide the product and services on top of the platform. I think that's very important. And I think that's also something that we try to do with GaiaX, with maybe you will come back to that, but with the idea of publishing some of the GaiaX projects in open source. So well, that was the point. There's no choice other than doing more open source in Europe, in my opinion. What else? And we already have lots of open source projects. So yeah, we see a few here. I think that one of another big strength in Europe with open source to succeed is that we get significant funding from Horizon Europe projects, from what we saw before, IPCEI, etc. And if we use this project to catalyze efforts to collaborate between the different actors, we can also push more technologies. And finally, I was before we started the panel. We were talking together, and you were asking me, so where is your office? So at the Eclipse Foundation in Europe, we are a fully distributed team, and I think if you think about it, that's a very well adapted situation for Europe, because Europe we are multicultural, so having people in the different countries, so it's much easier when a German person comes to talk to German people, when a French person comes to talk to French people. And so building these real European teams, that's what we do in the European project, when we do in the big European initiatives, and what has been done by developers, by open source developers for the last 20-30 years. So that's maybe my final message is we need to empower more the developers also.
Thanks a lot, Gael. Moving to Andreas, you represent different associations and all dealing with the Cloud-Edge, and it's clear that one of the challenges now is the interoperability, and we are working a lot on these teams, and we are curious to know a bit also what is the state of the development of these standards to support interoperability, and I suppose you are working on some of them, for example, in GaiaX.
Well, let me explain the journey of GaiaX at this point. When we talk about this cloud-edge interconnection scenarios, we are very clear there is no one-size-fits-it-all approach. So we need a kind of abstraction. And the initial trigger for GaiaX was the industry. So it was not driven by the providers. The industry said, well, we are advanced, we have our sensors in our production facilities, we are capable to deal with digital twins and all these things, and now we want to make value out of the data. But we are getting scared if we just have a few choices how to process them. Because beside the fact, even if we talk about machine data, there is a level of intellectual property linked to these machine data, as well transferring them into dedicated environments like the hyperscaler infrastructures. You're also transferring a reasonable level of domain knowledge. Just where are the entities where data are occurring, how they are getting orchestrated, how they are getting processed. And this was, we need something else, we need some more openness in this area. And this was then the trigger to promote this federation approach and the federation services. And this was mainly in 2020, where we had these 4 dimensions. We need to talk about identity and trust. management. We need to talk about service and participant descriptions to provide transparency. And we need to discuss how to share data in a sovereign way, to apply data sharing with usage policies, for example. And altogether to consider compliance criteria around it. So these are the 4 pillars, and we discussed it in 2020. And then we are getting to a point, sketching something on PowerPoint is so easy. Turn it into action is the challenging part. So bring PowerPoint into operation, this is the painful part. And so we made the decision in 2020, before we facing 20 repetitions of the same PowerPoints, we need to turn it into code. And we made the decision to build the federation services as open source code. Apache license 2 to contribute it to the world. Not to contribute it to Europe, to contribute it to the world, to everyone. And everyone can fork it, I don't care. But we are binding the conceptual model and the standards which are already out there and orchestrate them into a functional model and to bring it into operation. So GaiaX is not here to build up new standards. Everything is out there. If anyone is telling me I cannot do this or this because GaiaX is not ready, this is bullshit. Because you can do everything right now. Everything is there. So what we are doing is to bring these things together, orchestrate them, bring it into a functional model, and also support some paradigm shifts. For example, when we talk about identity management, we are talking about self-sovereign identities, using most out of the W3C standards which are related to Web 3.0. I'm not talking about NFTs or cryptocurrency or something like this. We are talking about how to orchestrate decentralized systems with keeping the level of sovereignty. And this is what happens right now. We are turning this into functional source code. These are the GitLabs and the GaiaX Association. We made already the decision by end of this year, everything will be moved into the Eclipse data, into the Eclipse project space. And then we are still there for another year to support the community for the uptake, to educate them, to adopt, to use it, and then it's on the community to enhance it. So this is where we turn it from a Kickstarter environment where we have dedicated resources to build it up into a community approach, and we need the support by Eclipse Foundation to get this done. But I think this is the only way to go, and keep this level of openness and provide services. And we're talking about things like wallets and authentication manager, contracting services, database which are capable to deal with resource description frameworks. So there's already a lot of stuff in there to modernize the digital world and to make it open and inclusive and address this level of cooperation between entities on a level playing field, to include European providers as well, for sure, and to allow the European economy to participate in this digital journey, to be part of this value monetization of digital services. And I think this is pretty good. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Andreas. I will come back after Antonis with some additional questions because you triggered a lot of interest. Coming to Antonis, you as a integrator, as we were talking before, you are often dealing with the use cases, and as you were mentioning, clearly often they have specific needs, and this might stretch a bit what is edge, cloud edge for them, and also they might have a different view of what is the best business model aspect related to adopting and using cloud edge in their use case. Can you tell us a bit?
Okay, great. First of all, I totally agree with the previous positions from the open source Andrea said about the interoperability. Something that is very strange and something that we must focus, again, is from the European perspective. Because I totally believe that we are an integrator that we tried, first of all, many years back, we tried to be, to move a lot of our resources in this area. But from the other side, you have the hyperscalers with their own strategy. You have a lot of pushing and pressing from this decision, and we have now two areas of development. First is the R&D space and the Horizon projects, and because we are very active also in the institutes of European, we don't see any penetration there. It's another decision making. The Europe operation, the operation of Europe, we are very active. We are parts of the GEA from the beginning. We are in the fireware part. We are partners. And this kind of interoperability is very, very important to be moved also on the decision making on the European operation. The other stuff that was very, I like it a lot, I was very impressed, was the positioning from the Spanish government about the data spaces. It's incredible. This kind of movement, this kind of inspiration, and this kind of standardization, and this kind of collaboration is something that we must standardize in many countries to work, because we are having a lot of business in different countries, and we can see the totally different levels of maturity of this area. And we are Europe, at the end. So I totally believe that the future side must have a European approach. All this IP and all these projects and all these investments that is coming, uniqueness, like fiber, like it's unique for our for the industry. I totally believe that the standardization of the edge is something that it's very, very important, because currently we are not part of an organization, we are not part of an institution. We try to build solutions for the customer, and we try to mature this solution earlier, because we want to have the niche market. And this is the biggest challenge, this is the nightmare that's coming, because you can see that first of all you have solution that's a black box solutions, you have the hyperscaler approach that is their own ecosystem penetration, you have the open source part, but it's missing the guidance or to work closer together and to standardize the stuff that it is today. And from the other sides, there are the integrators that we try to decentralize this kind of stuff and work with our ecosystem. But it's many times there is a lot of challenges. Now, for the edge perspective, I can tell that it's for us it's something that was totally normal. We are in the defense market for many years, so I believe it's a matter of maturity and non-maturity. So I believe the cloud coming and becoming the reality and the mature. So the edge part and this kind of limitation, we're facing that in many other industries that is more mature in this area. So the defense, the edge part is huge importance, and the cybersecurity. So of course, maybe in other, so in other markets that is becoming now, they are transforming this kind of standardization. It's coming now from the importance. The second market that we can see that for us is very important market is in the autonomous, from the robotics and from the UAV part. And we can see now that the standardization is coming and the autonomous is coming more and more in different areas, spaces. It's an area of fighting of the standardization, cloud and edge. Because, we are working on a medi-drone solution, on a delivery drone. The decision making, the constraints, the telecommunications, the security is everything on a constraint based also on the battery, on the energy and the flight time. So there is a lot of use cases that have different complexity and needs on the edge part, but the whole our work is becoming very, very difficult because of the missing of standardization. So I believe from the European perspective, with all this brilliant project that is running, Europe must take a decision to clarify and to standardize. And we want to see more from the institute's perspective or from the R&D project to be more clear that you need solutions to support them. Not mention like it's good if you have it. Mention that. We must standardize ourselves first of all. Okay? Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Antonis. So, if anyone in the audience want to make questions, of course I'm very happy to invite you on stage and make them. But meanwhile, I have a question for Gael. You know, we have been working together on something that will start in a few months, right? And one of the items we discussed there is the fact that clearly open source in this discussion of digital autonomy of Europe in creating cloud edge ecosystem is very important. But still, if you look at the large projects and look at the top 10 contributors, you see that these are mostly from US and China. So what is your take on why European industry is not up in the top contributors in this key software?
Yes. Okay. I think that, well, we say that, okay, the hyperscalers are mostly in the US and there are a few actors in China. And historically, they have been the big technology creators. They have been the one who were pushing in open source. And I think that in open source, we have in Europe, we have several significant initiatives that have been started some time ago. But my take on it is that the next, we need to engage more the industry players in open source. So you said one concrete example. You said that we moved the Eclipse Foundation that used to be a US-based organization. So we moved it to Belgium, and when we moved to Belgium, then Daimler, for example, became a strategic member of the Eclipse Foundation. And what I like very much in this example is that you would not compare Daimler to Google or the other hyperscalers. But if those, I think that those industry players, they are also one of the big strengths of Europe. And having those industry players investing more in open source will also certainly help structure the ecosystem. And so you were talking about GaiaX and publishing projects, etc. One of the most recent members that joined the Eclipse Foundation is Amadeus, and that's definitely in the context of GaiaX that they want to contribute to some projects, and so that's really, that's the point of having a critical mass also of developers and of developers collaborating together. I think that in the past in Europe we have been maybe a few times fighting to create the best, the most beautiful solution, and maybe we lost a bit of energy in this.
Yeah, of course, energy dispersion is always a problem. I think Klaus want to add something, and then I'm happy to hand over.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like me, it does like me. Well, what Gael said, I think this is exactly the point I would like to make. What Europe is lacking because of the fragmentation of the cloud service providers, fragmentation of the providers, the necessary scale to really be significant in this project. If you mention Daimler, Daimler is also part of Catenos, the association of car manufacturers in Europe, and they decided as companies to work together to build source code and then to bring it to the Eclipse Foundation. And I think we will see many other initiatives where we are, like GaiaX, building associations, having companies work on a joint interest in, somebody mentioned co-opetition before, but in a joint interest. And for that, it's of course important to use open source because it's a way of trusting each other. And I would like to contradict you on one point. I think much open source started in Europe. It has perhaps not been commercialized very well, but it started there. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, I have one question because I fully agree with what Klaus just said. Open source in Europe is quite strong. The only thing is that main open source components that are used to build cloud environments are not European. I mean, you say that open source is something global, that's true, but the reality is that behind these open source components, we have mostly US companies So they control the roadmap and they control the fund. And that's a big problem. So if you want to achieve technological sovereignty, you cannot base something that is strategic using components. It's true that it's open source, it's true that it's Apache license, it's true that you can fork the code, but at the same time it's true that you cannot, or you don't have the resources to maintain that code if the companies behind decide for any reason to roll it. That is a very big concern. So this is that is a big question. And another question I would like to know your opinion is about the European Commission is planning to support and to define a sovereign open source cloud system, something that is governed by European companies. Do you think that makes sense, or do you agree that it should be something global?
Well, I don't know, but sorry, because before answering your question, if I can, so yes, we are working with Catenaix, we are working with GaiaX and with others, and I just want to say, because it's potentially not clear, I didn't say it before, so that's not just because we are nice people and just because we moved to Europe. That's because we implement a rock solid framework for open source governance that enables open source projects to, and maybe that's the answer to your question, to work in an open, transparent and meritocratic way. And I would say that that means that, okay, everybody should be able to participate. What happens in a project should be transparent, and that's not always the case, especially when you have, I think that one of the problems is that if you have a single company managing an open source project, then of course this single company makes everything possible to keep all the intellectual property on the project and to have the freedom to potentially change the rules. So that's something that is not always visible from a user perspective, because from a user perspective, you get an open source project that's good technology, and you start using it, you start experimenting, and at some point, this company, because that's only one company, they can change the rule, and that happened with Elasticsearch, with MongoDB, etc. Some of them are here, and I think we can elaborate, but we know that it happens. And so the role of an open source foundation, like the Eclipse Foundation, is to enable the sustainability and to enable to make sure that everybody can contribute. And then comes the answer to your question. When we have a project under our governance, we make sure with our rules and processes, and also with our team, who has been doing that for 20 years, so we make sure that everybody can contribute. And then, I'm sorry, but if Europeans want to contribute more, the door is open. And that's where sometimes I'm also a bit frustrated, and also why I was asking who is working in a team that is contributing to open source. I mean, we had a quarter of the hands up, which is not bad, but my hope is that in a few years from now, we have 80% of the hands that are up. Because, and I don't want everything to be open source. I think that, but having the core platforms open source to enable an ecosystem of services and products, that's where we can really win.
Just want to bring in another aspect of this discussion. I agree that standards are important, but especially in Europe, we are sticking to standards in the hardware world, but it doesn't work in the software world. And we need to be more agile, we need to be faster. And we cannot wait always for standards. We need to implement, we need to showcase, we need to learn to deal with data-driven business models. Just looking in this landscape, when we talk about distributed identifiers, there are already more than 100 methods. We have this wall of blockchains, which is the best blockchain to deal with identities, and so on and so forth. And I cannot wait after we find consensus on this. We need to advance, we need to move forward, we need to show evidences that we are doing the right things and that we learn how to deal with data and how to enhance ourselves with business-driven models. And to be honest, I don't care about the hyperscalers and the login and all these things. This is commodity. We are talking about new business models. When we talk about cloud and edge, it's complete different scenarios. It cannot just be served by a hyperscaler. We have a multitude of active operators who need to work jointly together, and we need to showcase the use cases, the business value in the first place. And then we can talk about harmonization by standards, bring the things together. Because we are not inventing anything new, we are just taking what is already out there, bring it together, and showcase that we are capable to deal with data business driven models, and that we show advancement for the economy. Well, I'm totally committed, whatever we do, it should be according to European values and standards. So this is the first choice, but it's not the single choice. We don't get any sovereignty just by open source or just by standards or something else. We need to bring it together, and then we achieve a better level of sovereignty. Either digital sovereignty or European sovereignty or domain sovereignty, whatever. But don't try to discuss everything for years and years. Just do it.
Absolutely. I think that in the end, today, the true, maybe not very well consolidated in Europe, is that open source is the new way to bring somehow standards to the market, because we like it or not. Today, for example, Kubernetes is a standard, even though it's not approved by ETSI or what else. And it's a standard because it worked and people decided to adopt it. And clearly, the old, let's say, approach that was very often pushed in Europe, which is like, let's discuss for 5 years and let's agree the standard, and then after that, let's try to implement something that works, is not helping the market. Well, maybe in some market is still reasonable, but not in the market linked to digital transformation. This is something that moves so fast that if you don't act, you basically lose money and market share against competitors. And I have one question, Andreas, given that we are talking about Europe, but the system is also global, and I was curious to know if you had a conversation with, about Gaia-X with other global actors, and to know what is the global feeling about the work we are doing in Europe.
The impressive part is we have already 15 hubs in Europe, but we have also hubs in South Korea, in Japan, India, Brazil, and Mexico are also very interested. They are facing all the same problem. How to deal with data-driven economy and how to keep a level of sovereignty within this context. So I'm looking forward to have Gaia-X in Shenzhen and in Detroit and in Brazil. This will be the best thing, because we are still talking about a global market and we need global concepts in this sense. And as long as we can showcase that we are really bringing the right things on the table, like we did with GDPR finally, because this was also well received and beyond the European borders. So this is the right way to go, and we have all the hyperscalers on board with Gaia-X. There were a lot of complaints about it, but I think it's the right move, because we cannot solve all the things together. We need to orchestrate wherever we can promote Gaia-X, and to some extent all the European players are not worldwide available. So how to address this? And we need to be better, we need to be smarter in this sense. And when we talk about modeling AI, this is where we see the competences in the future to have such models. And we are always, when we talk about language models, we have GPT-3. We need something similar in Europe, because this is the future. This is where we need to invest, and all these things are just dealing with data and to process them, to make added value out of data, and this is where we need to learn more, and it has to be done in a cooperative way. Like Catena-X, they are all competitors, but they are facing the same issues with supply chains. They are facing issues, well, I would like to sell this 100,000 euro car, but I'm missing this 50-cent microchip. So this is the problems we are facing today. And we need to bring solutions to this, and hopefully this will help, and this is still on a global scale.
Thanks a lot, Andreas. Before Antonis was mentioning also the role of potential role of European projects in helping the development of technologies and exploring of solutions. And I have to say, as you know, I'm like 20 years in this business, more or less. And one of the things that I always didn't like, and I hope is changing now, is that yes, we are doing open source in the European project, and this was literally meaning I opened an account on GitHub where I put the code, and there was like, no, this is not doing open source. And I mean, it's surely a problem of culture in the research institutes, maybe in the companies, but I think it's also a problem of governance, because probably who is driving from a political point of view this project is not doing the work in the right way. And I believe that my greatest point of illumination in relation to this was the change we had during the Future Internet PPP. I'm not sure how many of you know this big industrial and public collaboration, but at the beginning was like, yes, we do open source, but I'm doing my open source, and no, you cannot contribute, but then how it's open source, and then most of the companies were picking really restrictive licenses like AGPL, and basically you have to give back everything. And during the project, and this because this was a big program, and we were trying to bring together many companies, it was clear that this could not work. And yeah, I'm curious to know your take on the ecosystem and how to make this happen from European project toward the industry, and also toward the stakeholder from the political point of view needs to push for the right direction.
It works. Well, as was mentioned before this morning, we have a new start with the important project of common European interest for cloud services infrastructure. And I think the concern that you have mentioned, how do you bring all these companies together to work on a joint activity? We have spent, if I remember correctly, 9 months in a process called matchmaking, and matchmaking across the different, I think it's 90 companies now, 12 member states, working on a joint text, what the objectives are. That's the starting point of a governance. It's not resolving your problem or your challenge. What I'm saying is that we have a new start. It's focusing very a lot on what is the common interest, what is the benefit across the 12 states to the wider Europe, and governance is recognized as something we will need to address. And what I can say as a positive result is we have seen enormous discussions, also starting on the commercial level. How can we create LOIs? How can we make cooperation agreements to actually make it work as a whole? I don't know yet if it's working, but at least we have a new start and a promising start of cooperation in that. And it's addressing exactly our topic. How can we join cloud, edge, continuum across multiple providers?
Thanks, Klaus. I don't know if someone else wants to.
Okay, yes. So, a small example. Every day we are competing projects in European institutes. We have our own data centers. Atos have their own data centers. Another. And we are contributing, we're building blueprints. We have projects. We have the climate stock exchange system. We have new workflows on EBA, EMA, and many other institutions and engaging. So the big question is the following. I'm allowed to put any architecture that I want. I'm replying. Let's say I'm building the GEA specialists and architects. So if Europe for their own needs. They will not put me and the players that we integrate to say that we'll integrate on the edge as part of our stuff, not only with the Azure blueprint. We need this. Let's have some pilot projects that will use this. So then a system integrator will apply, will put people on this project, will contribute, and will provide architecture. So I believe it's something that is very unique. From the one side, we building the institutions. From the other side, like a customer, we don't do it. It's a problem. I'm very raw on that. Okay.
Yeah, maybe we have 9 seconds, so just a final comment on the licenses topic. I think that today the industry has chosen permissive licenses, so Apache, MIT, BSD, the Eclipse Public License. So if there is a big ecosystem that is under GPL and the like, which is the Linux kernel ecosystem for historical reasons. But new projects, I think, should start with one of the 4 that I just listed. Right? And we can discuss about it for hours, but that was to keep it short.
Thanks a lot. Well, thank you guys. I don't want to steal more time, given that we are already 1 minute almost, but it was really interesting discussion. And it was really a pleasure to host you here. And I'm looking forward for additional collaboration with our upcoming projects with the Commission.